let's call the meeting to order. Thank you. That's why we
Put
got
6:01 in the minutes.
That's why you did
It was not, I had 6 o'clock, but
This is the official time.
Oh, sorry, yeah, of course.
surprised you didn't have an alarm set.
I know.
I'll bring one next
What
time.
time is that? Okay, so everyone had a chance to look through the minutes? Yes? They look fine to me.
Yes.
Yes.
I make a motion to accept the minutes as written. For what was the date?
It was
August.
7/12.
July 12th,
July.
2017.
Did we get a second on it?
I didn't second it. I don't, they were my minutes, so I
Oh, okay, Teresa wasn't.
I'll
there.
second that.
shouldn't.
Okay, any
Thank you.
discussion on those? No?
Nope.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh,
Aye.
just, you can abstain, yeah.
Abstain.
Oh, that's
Right,
right.
thank you.
4 yes and 1 abstention.
Okay, so number 2 is we had, from what I could see, I did a little, I think I sent this to you, and I printed out some extras.
Just
A little
Yeah.
summary that kind of
Yeah.
shows why these 3 popped and, so we had 3 areas to look at, town council, was over quite a bit. I'm just trying to remember, we ramped it up, but not by that much, only to like 60,000,
We increased it to 65, I think.
65, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the last year, there was a significant amount of other issues that arose between bylaws and
I saw
some
that.
legal matters and, so I think if you'll recall it, town meeting, council stood up and said that this was a, abnormal year, that kind of money is not needed on an annual basis. So he was comfortable with the amount we were raising, it should cover a normal year's worth of legal.
Right, I mean, I looked through the bills personally, and I looked to see, were there just, ridiculous phone calls or,
Right.
I didn't see any of that because we were questioned at town meeting, I don't know if you remember about it.
I
Did we look through the legal bills? And at that time, we hadn't had the chance to do that, but, I saw the different cases, there were several cases in the cemetery of all
That's right.
places, very unusual cases. There was the zoning, there was.
A lot of land matters that are still ongoing that are very complex.
Right, I saw that there were things that got settled, there were cases that got settled, and there were very few, in my opinion, at least from my look through, there were very few just frivolous phone calls, you see people just calling and churning up hours.
Well,
Under the general, there wasn't that much spending when you looked, like it was broken down by the cases and by general. So what did you think?
well, I know that it was an abnormal year, because I kind of took a look at the, like, five cases, and I summarized them. And it's not audible because I'm not 100% it's right, but the Brandolini case alone was over 16,000.
Yep, okay.
The cemetery, for some God forbidden thing, was almost 5,000.
There was a couple of those.
No.
There are several cemeteries.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, the
Right,
cemetery,
yeah, it was quite a
okay?
bit,
Yeah, I know there was a few of them, I didn't know if they were related. SD, $10,600. Then there was a homeowner issue around home business, I guess, I don't know. And that was $7,600. So that totaled up to like over $39,000.
Right.
So I don't know what these cases were about. And it's not up to us, I don't think, to figure out what could have been done better in each one of them,
right.
because we don't have the facts at hand.
No, but it's up to us to kind of weigh in on, do we think the amount of money that we put in is going to be sufficient, or do we still have a concern? I mean, it's okay to still have a concern. We're just taxpayers, like everybody else in the town. We're sitting here looking at these things, and you're right. We don't know, and we're not supposed to weigh in and say, well, I think they should have done this.
Right.
We look to see, were there things that didn't look right, or everything was accounted for.
Right.
So we raised it from, 40,000 to 65.
I think 65.
I hope 65.
No, I don't have it.
But those have been all settled, right? I mean, the ones
So, so some of them. So the Brandolini matter is closed. Several of the cemetery matters are closed. There's still one ongoing. The homeowner issue is ongoing. While the SD matter isn't completely settled, it has died down dramatically. There's very little legal involvement at this point. It could flare up again because it's not a
Right.
resolved matter. I can actually say right now there's not many, if anything I can think of as active cases. I think I actually went on the phone with counsel the last several days, but not ongoing matters. It's the first time I think this whole fiscal year I've talked to them. So I think most of the cases are, have quieted down. They are planning to come to the selectmen's meeting, I think September 18th, and give an update on the legal matters, and just where things stand. Town council. It'll be, just an overview of sort of where things are. And as of right now, there's nothing, I don't believe there's anything that's covered under executive session, so it will be a fully public matter. So you'll be able to hear as he's going through any ongoing cases where they stand.
Okay, and just for our information, it was set at 40,000, we did raise it to 65,000, but in 2016, we spent almost 85,000.
Right, so,
So you almost wanna look at like a 5-year trend or something.
but again, the abnormal part is, like, in 2016, it was the zoning bylaws that took a significant amount of legal money. And so, now we have people in place that are well versed in that, and they meet on a monthly basis and put recommendations. We actually didn't even have council review the bylaws before it went to town meeting, because they're so versed in it, he had already reviewed it over the last 2 years, that he was comfortable just saying, let it go. So, I think you'll see that need will not be there anymore for those types of things as much as it is. And like I said, knock on wood, right now the cases are quiet, there really isn't anything stewing that's been ongoing or that I could see being ongoing.
Well, let me ask you this, we're looking at a budget that I think had been set at $40,000 for
A long time.
a long time, being maybe 10 years, maybe more.
I know it's been a long time, but
So, is that we made a pretty big jump in it, do you think that next year we would need to make a small adjustment, just to kind of start to get people used to the fact that this might need to keep moving a little bit?
I do. I mean, obviously, rates increase, not every year, but they do increase. As things come up and initiatives comes up, we're gonna need counsel for certain things. So if we wanna do, I don't know, something else, or when we start talking about, Center Street and the land. Right now it's quiet because we have bonds and there's nothing you can do with it, but eventually that discussion will come back up. I'm sure council will need to be involved in things like that.
Well, that is one question I did have, and maybe I should reserve it for one that seemed like the School Street project, the sidewalk project required legal counsel.
But that's all covered under chapter 90 in the project. So anything
But
that's the School Street or Route 97 is covered by, doesn't come out of our legal budget.
So
So-
the legal fees were billed back, cross-charged back.
Correct.
So they don't show up in this overage?
They do not.
Oh,
They do not.
okay. Okay.
One thing that is something that could be discussed that I talked to several other communities is, on particular issues, I'm just gonna use the cemetery, there were some issues in the cemetery, and some of them could have been handled differently at the beginning to not cause where we were. We could make them pay for those costs, if they're needing legal expenses for certain things that the town had no control over, it was mishandled, or whatever the
Yes.
situation is,
Yeah.
it's not unlike when CPA needs things. The CPA fund covers their legal expenses. So if we're doing a land purchase with CPA, that's charged to, those legal bills are
Okay.
charged to CPA. So we could certainly look at things like that as well. That if it happens to get outrageous, or we say, we've spent way too many hours on this under the town's general fund, now you need to kick in some money,
Mhm.
to try and get to a resolution.
Yeah.
Those are options as
Yeah,
well.
I would address it there may be some things that they can improve so you don't run into issues in the future. What are the learnings from this litigation that got settled? This Brandolini one was the snow thing.
Yes.
So we paid, on top of still paying them the full amount, they asked another $16,000.
And actually, I will say it's more, because it was 2 fiscal years.
Well,
Okay.
Is this
so,
the roof?
I don't
Yeah.
understand on
Right.
that,
Right.
you know, so.
Okay, so
All
we'll
right.
live and learn, so we've raised it to 65,000, is there a sense of the committee that we feel that that's a pretty good number, or are we still on edge
Well, I think one of the
about
things that,
this?
well, I think one of the things that'd be really, really, really helpful, even if we post a meeting and 3 of us or more show up at the September 18th presentation by council, let them give us a sense as to what might happen in the not so distant future, and then we'll get a better sense based on what they say. Because I'm not gonna speak for anybody, but I bet you there's gonna be 1 or 2 selectmen, they're gonna complain about legal bills, and they're gonna say, do you expect to charge us the same or more next year, something like that.
Right.
And then we can come away from that meeting and say, well, I think we're comfortable where we're at, or there's some things coming down the pike that we need to worry about.
And I
Okay.
can always get at any point, so like,
Yeah,
say the January meeting, I could give you a snapshot of where the first 6 months of the fiscal year
Right,
landed us, so that you could see that's
Yeah,
what
we
we've
could
spent
do
so
that.
far.
Yeah.
Where are we trending to the 65,000?
like for example, next year, we don't have a big project like the zoning.
Right, however, there's always
Do it.
projects, so you have to think,
Right.
we're gonna be getting into obviously high school projects, that doesn't involve us specifically, but there may be matters.
Somebody go there.
A senior center project that's coming on board that we may need council involvement. So not to those scales, but there will be stuff. But I think some of those will be known in advance, that depending on where we are the first 6 months, you can say, well, this looks like it might be a bigger issue, or we think we might need more council, or maybe not as much.
I mean, it would seem to me the bigger the project, the more issues are gonna come up. You're gonna have
well,
neighbors complaining that you're forcing them into a situation that they didn't have before. You have to hire counsel for that, and they will bring in their own counsel, so. Every big project is gonna have that, including the one next to the cemetery, okay?
yeah,
That is a big, good-sized project,
And there's a
Yeah.
lot of projects coming up
and
like that.
butters may not be happy with the zoning board decision or whatever, so I'm assuming that you're always gonna have some things that are driven by those circumstances.
right. I do like the idea of trying to get the legal fees more into, if it's not really a town created or town responsibility, just individuals in the town.
Are you talking
There
about
should
boards and
be-
committees, or?
No, individuals in the town to perhaps have a, you know, a conflict and it involves a town department. If the town department has no control over it, you know, at what point do we say, okay, the town council has said this is what you have to do, you have to go do that, and then come back to us when that's done. And I think that would help a little bit if that's more clearly understood, because the town council can't be the council for everybody in town, you know?
Right.
The role of the town council is to protect the taxpayer.
Right.
Right,
Well,
isn't
I
that
think the
primarily-
education for me is,
Mhm.
be careful what you say
Yeah.
and say what you mean, because it's
Yes.
gonna require town council,
But I think we did a very responsible thing, holding the ground and saying we wanted the $65,000 in there, looking at how, this is where I'm headed, just looking at the end of the year, I feel good, I mean, that was a big increase
Well, I was
on
gonna
that
say,
budget.
it's like a 50% increase to the
Right.
budget, so that's a
Right.
starting point.
It's a 62% increase.
And then
Yes,
see
we
where
did
it
great.
goes from,
Yes, and I think we
it's
did
a
the
big leap,
responsible
it's
thing.
a big change, and it's a point, I mean, you gotta just choose a point at some
So
point.
you can give us a barometer check in January,
Right.
and we don't feel the need to go to the meeting on September 18th.
You can or you can't, I think
Oh, I don't think that'd hurt.
if you have the time, I would definitely go, cause I think it's always interesting to learn more from them, they're really,
Right, and you
Well-
don't need to post that if you're just there as an audience member, or,
Even if there's 3 or 4 of us.
Correct,
Right, as long
correct.
as we're not.
And that's the 18.
unless we go
The
with
18.
Veronica.
right now, he's gonna get back to me, because if there
Perhaps.
is anything under executive session, then that part would be obviously executive,
Okay.
so, right now, he doesn't believe there's anything, it could be just a public update.
okay, so that was the one area, another area was, as usual, the snow removal budget. It went over quite a bit, and we talked about that fact that it had not been increased in a long time. We were chasing that deficit all the way through the spring. And luckily, you know, when I think back to it, if it hadn't been for like the Essex Tech extra money and some things like that,
Yep.
being there, I think we would have been riding it into the free cash certification, which would be very detrimental for us. So, I'm really concerned about that deficit moving forward. We did not increase that at all, I'm pretty sure, let me just check. At the time of town meeting, we had just balanced the budget, so there wasn't really additional money available. Yeah, we held it at the same amount, which, looking back to 2016, we held it at 165,000, and 2016, if this is correct, is 175,678. Do you think that's a
Yeah, 2016 was not a big year.
okay?
But then if you go back to 15 with the blizzards, it was out of control again. So I will say that's another one that's been static at 165,000 for quite some time.
So,
I
what-
do think it's worth looking at increasing that next year.
Okay, I looked at the plow rates, I mean, I don't know which one truck from another, but then I looked at the, Department of Transportation rates, and we seem to be very competitive with their rates. I don't know if we should be, but,
And ours actually haven't increased since I've been here, our rates have not increased.
so over the last 3 or 4 years.
These are the vendor rates.
Yep.
Well, I mean, I would say at the very least that in our recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, we would recommend that they hold the line on the rates for another winter, since we didn't increase the budget at all.
Yeah, so
No
I
big
actually
deal.
spoke to Bob Arakalian about that today. We were just chatting, and he said, in the past when he is proposing an increase, he goes before the board and they actually approve it. So that's just how I knew it hasn't been done since I've been here. And he had at this point has no plans to request an increase.
And is there a feeling from the committee, percentage-wise, or what do you wanna look at to figure out a number for next year? What types of data do you wanna see?
I would look at 2 years back and last year and average it out or something like that.
Oh,
So
a
you
little bit
get
more,
the
because
worst
we
case.
had that
No, I
bump.
would do
When I look at
5.
it, I think this,
I mean-
2016 was a even year, but the year before it was astronomical.
All right, whatever the
So I think if
best
you
3
put that in,
years
it's
are,
gonna make it.
whatever those 3 years
Yeah, the
are.
3 years.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you're pulling
Yeah.
2 numbers, there's no difference between pulling 2, 3,
No.
No.
4,
Right.
5.
Now,
right?
on the big
Right.
year, did we get a reimbursement from the state because of emergency
did.
funds?
We
Okay.
did.
Oh, yeah.
So there is
that
that
would
to
come out.
factor in. When it's a
Right.
big one, it'll
Those-
be a
those are
while,
one-time.
but.
Those are one-time.
Right, and that does not go into the snow and ice because we just got it. I just got the
That's what, I
reimbursement
know,
a few
you won't
months
get
ago.
it right
So
away.
it went in, it'll fall
Did
to
you put
free
it in the
cash.
general fund?
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah.
So we really can't take that into account in
You
our,
cannot.
No,
in our.
it'll
figure
come,
on-
but you don't know when.
It can feel good in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
But not fix any of the numbers.
Well, it
Right.
keeps your cash good, I mean, you'll get it and you'll just put it in the general fund.
Okay. Well, I mean,
So you can redeploy it into the
Yeah,
budget.
right.
Oh, jeez, pardon me.
So,
what? Oh.
no, don't worry.
I get that all the time.
Okay, so, but, well, I guess the point is,
It's just like the guys that call the house.
you know, probably at least a 10% increase, at least a 20,000 bump should be counted on, which is going to put pressure on other budgets, we know that.
Right, I mean, I will say the good thing is snow and ice, it's only spent on snow and
Right.
ice. So if you don't, it's not like an expense line that you're increasing that you could charge other things to it if you have more money.
Well, depending on the capital expenditure, if it happens, it doesn't happen next year. Somehow there should be money set aside for maintenance of vehicles and stuff, I'm assuming.
In snow and ice, you mean?
Yeah, no, in the highway
Highway.
department
Don't we
budget.
have that? Road machine?
Right.
Yeah.
In other words, is the budget on the road, on the trucks or whatever they do to repair them and keep them maintained, does that line item have to increase?
Does it have to?
No, I'm saying, would it be,
Oh,
yeah,
Because if you get more snow, the trucks are more likely to break down.
Well, they made a request for
Well,
a
we
good piece
did,
of equipment last year.
Yes.
They
Right.
decided not to get it because they said they could do
but we
maintenance
did increase
on
their
it.
expense budget.
Right, so
For
you
the
increased
maintenance.
their, vehicle
We did.
maintenance to make up
We
for the
did.
fact that they did not get a new vehicle.
Right.
We did.
So if they
Yeah.
don't get a new vehicle again, I
Right.
don't know what the condition of that will be.
Right, right,
Yes.
so it's just
That
something
might
that,
be,
it shouldn't be flat, it should,
No, we increased it.
yeah.
We went from,
So the snow and ice is 165,
45,052.
and we jumped to 90, by 93,000 more.
And it wasn't a bad year,
That was a pretty
a lot of
serious.
ice.
It was actually 108,000 more,
Right, cause we did,
because
we
I
were,
transferred
you-
some at
you-
special
you-
town
you-
we
meeting.
were
15
chasing
also.
this deficit through the spring, as I
So
said.
it was way, I mean, it was so under budget, it wasn't a budget.
We have to start making measured
It-
steps.
Yeah,
Right,
We have
right,
to.
so, but like I was getting at, if you increase it by 20,000, say, and we
Yeah.
have a good year, that
That's-
money will just fall to free cash, cause you can't spend it on anything else. Whereas if it's in a vehicle maintenance line, you can get a few more vehicles fixed and you can,
No,
snow and ice is only snow and ice.
Well, can
So
you-
we can't burn it at the end of the year if there's a balance, it just will fall to free cash.
No,
You
yeah.
can't transfer,
You could transfer it out if you need it, but that would be in there for transfers or
So
just
somebody
extra
else
money.
It would need to be
The,
Right.
the dilemma is that if you don't account for some of the, we have not increased this budget at all. If you don't start to account for some of this increase
it's
in
not a
giving
budget now.
all the other departments budget money
Just
and
putting
buying
pressure
new
on.
trucks, one of these years, we're not gonna have enough free cash, we're gonna go into the red.
right,
This year, again, if you look at just the way the cards fell for us with Essex,
we
you know,
have
we
to,
got
we
very
have to add,
lucky.
we have to add something because,
yeah, I
Listen.
agree on that.
I
By
don't know,
default,
my,
we've been
my
in
memory
it.
tells me it wasn't,
Right.
it wasn't a mild winter, but it wasn't a brutal winter.
But I think a lot of salt and sand more
No,
than.
It was
Bob
nice.
said there was
Nice.
more
It was
salt and
nice.
sand this
before
year.
anybody woke up.
Right.
Okay.
Yes,
That's
and when we
all
bought
right.
all the materials, we
Yeah.
thought we were done, and then we had like another ice storm and had to
Yeah,
buy
just
more
time.
materials.
Right, right.
Well, I'd be in favor of bumping it up,
Yeah,
you know, should we add 20,000, I think
No,
so.
I would go 50, but that's
I
just,
think it needs to be more than.
I'd be happy with 52, yeah.
oh, 50?
yeah, well, I mean,
Well,
come on,
that's gonna
we've been
crunch the
fooling
budgets.
ourselves for how many years
Right.
now?
Yeah,
I mean, come on,
Unless we target 50 as a baseline over 2 years, we do 25 this year and 25 next year. Just
yeah,
like,
we'll
just
do a
like do steady
transfer
bumps.
and, you know, we'll be talking about it again, so.
Yeah. I don't think
So-
we'll-
well, I see what you're saying, see, rip the Band-Aid off or take it
Like I
off
said,
in two
let's
pieces.
let's
Which
look
way are
at
we
the
gonna do
last
it?
3 years and then we'll make a more intelligent decision, so
Okay,
let's not come up with an
So we'll
amount
base
until we
base
can
our
do a
decision.
kind of a look back.
Well, and I'll give 5 years and then you can decide, because I do think there's been one's been really high and one's been really low. so-
Right.
But just the amounts, I wanna
Right.
know
Yeah, no,
about.
And you know, the
the
year that we
the
got
amounts
reimbursed
spent.
from the state, I don't know, you know, maybe treat it as if we didn't get reimbursed, you know.
I won't, cause it won't even be in that budget,
Okay,
so when I run that
Yeah,
budget,
you're
it's
just
not in
gonna-
there.
You're just gonna average it.
And you never know when the state's not going to.
Exactly, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
You
That's
can't
why I
count.
wanna factor in, I don't wanna factor in any help
No.
from the state.
I know,
So
I wanna
we'll-
make believe that that was a bill we got stuck with 100%.
right, we did.
We'll look at the past and I
In fact,
think we'll
in a
come
way
up
we
with
did.
something, right?
Okay, alright, so we got one less area, the, fire department, we
department,
did
yeah.
emergency transfer for truck maintenance,
Oh, the two
and
trucks.
then another
Mhm,
transfer
yeah.
for wages, and, it's a difficult budget to manage, I understand that. But again, if this keeps going, year after year, we have to ask ourselves, is there enough money in that budget for what they're doing or not?
And I will tell you that, I just got an email, I think it was this week, from the fire chief on his vehicle maintenance, I believe. And I think engine 2 was out for a week or
I
two,
noticed
there was some
that.
issues, so,
Yeah,
the way we're trending right now, he believes that line will be over at the end of the fiscal year.
that was my thought too, that especially if we're trying to get the capital more spread out, so that we're not trying to buy multiple trucks in 1 year, we're trying to pace it so that the town can afford it. We're gonna need to increase maintenance for these vehicles that are gonna be held on to a little bit longer than people expected. So,
Which makes the maintenance go up.
Right. Does he forecast what the truck's gonna be needing? You know, sometimes you can have it,
So there are normal expenditures every year. Most of them, I don't know if you remember last year or this past year, they all happen like May and June. That's when the trucks get inspected, and that's normally when, if there's an issue, they fix it. So that's what he said, is right now, given the, so he has the money in his budget to cover the repairs needed,
Right.
because it's early in the year. But expecting a few other issues along the road, he won't have money to do his annual testing, and that's when he'll have to come back and say, I'm just not gonna have enough, because of these issues that have occurred throughout the year now, with
Okay.
engine 2 and whatever else.
So will that be prior to the to the annual town meeting? Because that's not really unforeseen when you know you have to do the inspection.
Right.
You know,
Right, so I think something like that, you know, and that's usually what I try and do for town meeting. So I keep an eye on all the budgets. If I see that one's close, I usually talk to the department heads and say, you know, this one's close, where are you? That's why we make those special town meeting transfers, to anticipate those types of
right,
things.
so you think that this will be able to be held
Hopefully,
over to?
yes,
Okay.
because we already know about it, so it's already on my radar that, you know, if we have a fall town meeting, which I don't anticipate, because there's really no business right now, but
Okay.
the next time we have a town meeting, we would have a special, and that would be one of the items addressed. Again, where we're gonna take money from is gonna be a matter, but, it's just something that I have now sort of out there that we'll need to look at.
Right, so it seems like in dividing up that budget and making it into all these lines and then moving lines around they're moving around a lot from year to year, and that's, I think, created a problem in that area. I think that they're too much, that used to be one line or one lump. And now it's a standalone line, it's too low.
Right.
So I don't know if there's money in another line or whether we have to actually increase that budget for that line, but I think it definitely would need to be addressed.
Right.
Because to say that it's unforeseen when we're sitting and talking about it now,
Right.
it's
Right.
not, and that,
Correct.
you know, technically, the truck that just broke, one could maybe argue, well, they didn't know that, but then again, what's the vehicle maintenance line for?
Right, and that's why
So
you
you
don't
go
consider
around the
this,
circle.
right, you don't consider the engine 2 as unforeseen. I mean, it is, but you have a budget that covers that, because again, it's early in the fiscal year.
Right.
So that's why,
But
you
we,
know, reserve fund transfers is unforeseen. I guess, you know, come May, he could say, well, it was unforeseen that engine 2 happened, and that's now what caused me to go over.
well,
But,
the two that we had last year, the two.
That was engine
vehicles.
2 as well, yeah, we
Right,
fixed it.
so I don't know, is engine 2, you know,
Yes,
time to trade it in, I don't know.
well, that may have been on the
that's an
capital
expensive
plan.
trade.
Well-
Think of the cost of the trade, it's probably more
Well,
than.
I haven't got the capital request here, but I'm pretty sure in there there's some equipment that
Right,
will
but
be requested.
Is the salary also trending higher?
Well,
I would suggest yes,
3 years?
based on,
I
yeah,
think so.
yeah, I think,
So, you know, there you go, there's a department,
if we're gonna continue to do this amount of, it, you know, they took on additional calls. They're taking on standby duty for storms, that's the company, that's assuming that's the company number, it's gotta be, they couldn't be doing anything else. If that's what everybody wants, if that's the selectmen, if they understand that's what's going on in there, then you should start to budget for it.
right, so that 179,222, no, I'm sorry, the 250,777, Right.
What did we give them?
on the
Just
left-hand
look-
side.
I'm looking to see what we gave them
total
at
fire
the,
budget, yeah.
so, we gave them 100,855,
Mhm.
which is just 2%, so it was just a little bit of an increase,
So we went up
they had
6.7%.
98,000 in wages, you know, unless, again, just like snow, you could have a year when you don't have as many calls, but we're picking up medical calls, which are a more consistent nature, I think. People tend to call, now that they know we have this service in town, they call.
Right.
But I'm saying, what was voted was 250, see that on the left?
Right, it's
looking-
the total.
Oh, okay, I'm
I'm
looking
talking
at the
about-
firefighter
Right, but
salary.
we
Yeah, so if I
really-
look at the baseline of $250,000,
Yes,
I'm assuming, I believe that that's been more or less the figure for a number of years. So the concept with these three budget issues that we have with these three different departments, the legal, the highway, and the fire department, in my opinion, also is therefore, we need to look at growing that budget amount higher.
in certain
250.
lines, I agree, if
Yeah.
you wanna keep these services up, so I think that,
Absolutely.
you know, the point would be that to
In other words,
to present to the selectmen that you can do this without going, they keep saying, well, he's gonna do this without going over, and I think you're just forcing them into a corner where they're, they're trying to move so many piles of money from here to there, you don't know what's going on. I would rather see them trend and keep things consistent so that we can understand.
Right, and you
How
can't
much money?
guarantee you're not gonna go over when you're a call-based department.
Yes.
you don't know
You
what
just-
you're
you
gonna
don't
get.
know.
You have no
Right.
idea.
I
Well,
You could have a
They,
disastrous
right,
year.
and we
You,
add,
you can control it a little bit.
well, it depends,
but-
but they've added additional services
Right.
and they've added what looks like storms coverage, where they put the people on so they're sitting there waiting in case there is a call.
Well, the item of concern
Yeah,
for me,
so I mean, that's,
that
you know.
maintenance is a real problem, because, you know, there is maintenance, you know, changing oil is maintenance, you know.
Yeah.
Fixing something that broke and broke down because the thing is dated is, still
Well,
falls on the
right,
Right,
maintenance,
and you wanna
but,
maintain your $500,000 machinery
yeah.
Yeah,
well, the point that,
versus replacing it, I
There's
mean, that's.
Right.
there's routine and customary, and then there's, you know, failure of equipment, and,
but Joe, just understand that years ago,
Concerns
what
me.
it was is they had like only 3 lines or 4 lines in their department
Right.
budget. So they had, you know, all this stuff here, equipment and supplies and equipment testing and everything lumped together. Okay, so they had a big lump and they weren't doing the medical that they're doing now.
sure,
So we've added services
I understand.
and we
Yeah.
didn't increase the budget.
Well, that's why
And that's the
I'm-
point, that
what
when you
I'm
add services, the selectmen need to understand.
What I'm advocating is I agree, I think we're in agreement, we wanna
Added services.
we wanna advocate for the fire department that a $250,000 budget is no longer a viable baseline to run the department the way it's trending, specifically in 2 areas. One is add on, you know, additional services, and 2, maintenance of dated equipment.
Right. And I would recommend too that they, just like with the police department, if they would present everything at the budget time, as far as added services, positions and everything, that would be much better than the way it's going now. And I know they have a different idea of what they're supposed to be doing, but it doesn't fall in line with when we're setting all the budgets to change things in June before the Board of Selectmen. And then now we don't know
Yeah.
what else has changed, you know, and I don't think it's much, honestly. So I think Joe's right, if we start to treat that like snow and ice and start to step it up a little bit.
Right, cause
You know.
again, every year, you know, and I will say, right now, we have a well-trained fire staff. We have, actually 2 more, I just got paperwork, but they just completed their EMT certification. So that cost us a little bit more when they get those certifications, so as we have people going through training and getting those certifications that, you know, obviously benefit our residents, it costs more. And bottom line is, we only increase the budget by the 2% cost of living. We're not taking into consideration any of those adjustments that may happen throughout the year
Right.
based on trainings and things like that.
Right.
So to just use a 2% as a flat number, not looking at calls or previous year's calls, we just can't sustain that.
If we give them
because-
280,000, then we can hold them to 2%, for example.
Well,
Right.
If
what,
we say, you know what, we kinda know you 250 ain't enough, and we're still gonna hold you to 2%, that doesn't make
I
sense.
don't wanna just give a lump, I think
No,
we
no,
wanna
no, no,
ask
no.
them to best as possible, look at the trend.
What's the trend?
And present that at the budget time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Not in June, so let us know what else might be changing in the next fiscal year, just, you know, as the police did when he came in and explained what he was doing with the different positions.
Yep.
Yeah, if we didn't take that step, we can just say, all right, well, based on this, well, 20,000 should be fine, but let them tell us instead.
Well, yes, cause we need to be able to defend this
Let the
to
chief
the
tell
other
us.
departments that are gonna want more money, and we're gonna say, sorry, there's not any more
Right.
money this year because we had to address snow and ice and this, we have to take some steps here, and we're gonna have to take a hard line. It's gonna be tough, there's gonna be people that are not happy with us.
well,
That's on-
I think our
Our-
fire
our
department's
honeymoon's
a
over.
bargain, okay, so, you know,
Yeah.
this is not even close to anyone else's budget. I mean, neighboring
No,
towns.
we're doing great.
They're in this, you know, 7
Yep.
digits.
No, understood, of course.
Understood. All right, so that's it for the finances from last year, good? So
Excellent.
what I'll do is just make like a memorandum and then send it out, and you guys next meeting just say, yup, that's what we think, and we'll send it to the selectmen.
And Denise is gonna get us the snow and,
Well, that's moving forward. I'm gonna just get a general memorandum that says this is what we talked about, this is what we looked at, and this is where we're heading. We're not gonna pick any numbers right now, we're just gonna tell them this is what we think moving forward. So the next thing on the agenda is the cable access agreement. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that.
yeah, I did, but I don't know what it means.
Well, the area of, that's available like for uses in the town is the 3% fees, right? So I read that and it seems fairly open. Now, does our town get its own, there was a sheet at the end of it that they have to fill out every year to tell us how much money the town gets?
So we get it on a quarterly basis.
Quarterly, you get, okay.
So let me back up and explain how
Yeah.
this came about.
Quarterly.
So, back in July, I guess it was, we got hit with a ransomware attack here in town hall. And it completely took down our network. It took down every aspect of our network, our financial software, our printers, our email. We were down for one solid week. In the process of getting that back up, we have realized here that, which was not unknown, but it's now more of a realization that our equipment here is antiquated. Our servers are outdated, our firewall is no longer being supported, and the initial expense of that, incident has cost us money that was clearly unforeseen. I don't have a very big technology budget. As a result of that, we had to make some changes right away. I took our financial software, it's now in the cloud. It's off of our server, it's separate, we can access it. If our server crashes, we have internet access, we can at least collect payments, send out tax bills, do everything we need to do. That came with a cost that we were not anticipating. And there have been some other issues that have been arising. Even today, our server crashed in the middle of the day for no reason. We were down, our printers wouldn't work, things like that. So we're in an unstable environment right
Are
now.
you on the cloud?
Just our financials.
Okay,
So
good.
we still house a Microsoft Exchange server, and and our file server's fine for what it needs to be. It's really our emails. Now our financials are in the cloud. So I got into a discussion with Kathy, just telling her where we stand, because I will need money in technology, whether it be a reserve fund transfer, a special town meeting transfer. We are going to be well over the technology budget because of this incident. And I will say, a few other things have happened with our financial software and, changing the staff in the accounting office, the auditor's recommendations that we're not doing what we need to be doing with our financial software. It's increased the fees on that side as well. So, that being said, I've posed the question of now what do we do, because we are running short. We got into a discussion about the money that we get from Comcast on the cable bill. So we get quarterly payments from Comcast on the 3% of the cable bill, and in addition, we get a lump sum every year for capital infrastructure on cable.
That's 100,000, right? Or is that 100?
It's,
Isn't it?
right, yes, it's around there.
It's
Right
100.
now, combined, we have, what did I tell you, 353?
353?
Yes,
I remember numbers.
353,000-ish in both of those accounts combined.
Yeah,
Now, in the past, I wanna say 7 or 8 years ago, that money was used to replace all of the town hall computers, it was used to do some infrastructure upgrades. So I have said, well, can't we use that money again?
Not anymore.
So we currently don't have a cable committee, we have 2 members. The chair, which is Tracy, and he said he's against that, he doesn't think it should be used for anything but cable. So that's sort of where we've gotten, and then when I brought it up to Kathy, she said, let's research it and do some discussions on it.
right, cause I was wondering, looking at it, cause the Board of Selectmen are mentioned in it as an authority. And these fees are the fees that all the taxpayers
We're
pay,
paying for them.
yeah, we're paying, it's our money. And I don't see anything that prohibits the use of it. That's, I guess, what I was looking for. I was looking for something that said, you cannot use it for this.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, there's 2 components, there's the 3% fee, and then there's the lump sum.
Right,
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think I'm wrong, but correct me. the lump sum can only be used for specific purposes,
Well, it's considered capital.
right?
So the difference is the 3% is used to pay filming of the meetings. The capital is used to replace equipment,
Right,
things like that.
right, cause when we had the
Cameras.
project where I think we spent $177,000 3 or 4 years ago for all the new
Yes.
equipment, we took it
Right.
out of this nice little $250,000 kitty
Yes,
that had built up through the
Right.
lump sums, so.
correct.
So the lump sum is to do what Tracy says, basically, in a way. And then the 3% fee should be absolutely free for us to do whatever we want,
No.
including snow removal.
No,
legal?
no, I think it's, no, the
No,
like, if we're
no,
talking
just kidding.
equipment purchasing and technology purchasing, that would be capital.
Okay.
My question is, if we don't have a full committee, where does the authority rest legally?
I would say the selectman is the
Board of
appointing
Selectmen.
authority of that committee.
That's what I wanted to know, that would be my, as a finance committee member, that's my question.
They're a
Can we get
non-operating
an-
committee,
Can we
right,
get
too.
an answer to that?
Correct.
So they
So-
have no authority
Cause this could
of the
help with the
size.
technology.
So if that is the answer, and then we have this worded properly, because I don't have it exactly figured out, then we can send them a letter and say, this is our recommendation.
Yes,
Well, I think we need to know what Denise is gonna ask for money first, what the cost and what the technology is.
Right now, we're over about $10,000.
No, when you wanna restart replacing, you
Oh.
know, you need to get that
Whole
number.
package.
right, but we first need to know where the authority to use the funds rests right now, we
Yes,
don't
Well, I
even
think,
know that.
right, or
We
I,
don't know.
are you just looking for a I mean, I would
At least
say
give me a
it's
guesstimate.
probably gonna cost us,
$250,000,
no.
100,000.
No, not even that. To replace the server, the firewall, the spam filter that we have, you're probably looking at 25,000.
And that's including.
That's including
outside
software.
support coming in and doing all that work.
Yes. It may not include the licensing, which is something I'm going back and forth on,
So
whether
we're
or not we
talking
license
not a
it.
large amount here.
No, no.
In my world, it's not a large
Correct.
amount.
Well, the question I just have is, in general, does this fall legally within the purview of this agreement? I don't know, I'm a layperson, to me, I didn't see anything that said you can't do this, but it didn't say specifically, go ahead and do what you want.
No.
So my question, these utility type agreements have a lot of verbiage in them, and, I hate to say it, but I would almost think town council or somebody would need to take a look at the section, just the specific to the fees and how they can be released or not released, and let us know.
The problem is driven by the agreement. It would have been so much easier if there was a Massachusetts statute that said, cable money can only be used for, or cannot be used for blank.
It's probably referenced a law, is there a law referenced in there at all? I think that there's laws that allowed for this, that's what I mean.
Yeah, well, there's United States code that's referenced.
Yeah. Okay,
I
so-
saw that, and I wasn't gonna read the United States.
Well, this is where I do the line too, Joe, I was like.
So I think there's money that we can use, and certainly $25,000 is not a problem. We just have to confirm that the Board of Selectmen have the appointment authority, which they do, and therefore can make the decision in the absence of a cable committee, and then we make a recommendation to them to say, out of this pot, take out this amount to fix that.
Otherwise.
That's our recommendation.
Right, otherwise we will need to think about
We
seriously.
can have that done by
We
September
have
18th.
yet another
meeting.
budget that's going to be out of money this year, so we're
Mhm.
starting to get, this is actually a good thing. We
Yeah.
actually understand
Yeah, I
what's
don't wanna
gonna
take it
happen.
out of anywhere else.
Okay,
We don't wanna
so
take it out from anywhere
we're
else.
good on this for right now, is everybody
Mhm.
good with this?
Yeah.
Can we have that done by September 18th meeting?
Ooh, that'd be great, get free advice.
No, cause he probably won't be, I'm sure there's a specialist.
No, they get paid for
Okay.
going to town.
Yeah, no, he doesn't get paid to come.
Doesn't it?
No, he doesn't charge for his updates.
Even when he goes to the town annual.
Town meeting, he
That's
does,
what I meant.
but when he comes and gives status updates, he doesn't. But, my guess is, because KP is so specialized with attorneys, there's someone that specifically handles cable contracts and things, so I can certainly reach out to them and, get their
All right.
feeling on it.
First meeting in October would be great.
Is everybody
Yeah, it
comfortable
may
with
be
this?
September if you guys have a regular
Yeah,
September
I mean,
meeting.
Okay,
I think so.
it makes sense,
Good.
okay.
I think it makes sense.
So the
I'm surprised,
salary,
I thought,
I'm
for
sorry.
some reason, I thought you needed a lot more, at
Yeah.
least initially.
No, I really, I mean, we certainly could.
You
We
make it
could
sound
replace a
worse
lot
than it
more,
is
but,
to me.
but the critical need is,
I think that's our tactic.
You know, but I
Get
mean,
them thinking it's really
Really
bad,
bad.
and then just tell them, well, I actually need this much. I'm like,
yeah,
I know.
all of a sudden, we're spending money we don't have.
I know,
as if
you're at
it's
$250,000, I'll take that.
well, maybe that's what it would take to do it right, okay?
Right,
I'm-
the
I-
bare bones versus
So,
the wish
if
list.
we got a bare
right.
bones, now if we add another building in the back and,
That's true.
you know,
Right.
Right, to really do what we should do, yes, cause we would run fiber to the buildings and have one set of servers and one phone system and absolutely.
I'm just saying, yeah, I'm just asking, think out for 5 years or so,
Right.
and then
Instead of the
What do you need,
immediate.
yeah?
Right.
What do you need?
what you
That's
think
a
you're
good
gonna,
point.
we know you got an immediate, and that's where the money has to go. But I don't wanna see like, we're scrimping and then, another attack comes along and we're.
Right.
So, I mean, that equipment's only good for 5 or 7 years
Right.
anyway, on a good
Yeah,
day.
true.
Alright, good,
Great,
All right, great.
thank you, that's good
All right.
agenda item.
very good.
And then there's my little pet, the salary survey.
The what?
The salary survey, we got some questions at town meeting on salaries and why we go across the board and why we don't do something different than across the board and whether or not our salaries are in line.
I was only one person that.
Well, I know, but I'm saying we've gotta think that maybe they're talking for more than one person. I mean, if people get up and ask us questions, and I feel like we should follow up a little bit, not spend a whole year on it, but a little bit of time. It wouldn't take that much time probably to, Denise has access to a municipal database, can access any town that we choose or anything. My concern is when you're comparing towns, that you compare apples to apples, and population isn't always the determining factor on what a town can afford to pay or what it's paying for staff. I mean, we do run with a very light staff in this town. But if you look at our what they call the equalized, it's EQV, right, is that it? It's the equalized valuation per capita, but, so what it puts it in perspective why, West Newbury can have a much, larger financial department than Groveland does. And the same with Georgetown. When you look at those statistics, we are below that. And so honestly, when you start to look for comparables to our town, you end up going out to like Western Mass, which is not where we're recruiting from. I understand that, but that is,
Well, I believe the question though is why are we giving 2%, because over a 5-year period, that would be 10%. Not the question of what's fair equity that we're
well,
paying.
they asked that
What's our
too.
turnover rate in this town for permanent employees out of the
It's not too bad.
very
Right.
low?
It's low.
Right,
Non-existent.
but I
So-
will say,
Well, that's.
it
that's
will
a
be
different
soon,
issue.
As they
3 to
retire.
5 years, we're gonna have a large retirement turnover.
Right.
Other than retirement.
But when you go to replace, you need to be aware of what jobs are and what or else.
From what I've heard, we're fair.
Yeah, so I mean, and I do that. I do, it is hard. So in order to really do apples to apples, you need a consultant to come in because you need someone to evaluate job descriptions, see exactly what sit down with every employee that's
Well, that's a
non-contractual.
compensation.
Well, and they would,
survey
right, you
and
need to see
recommendations.
exactly what you're doing, and then you look at your comparable communities and see what they're doing.
Okay.
But every year since I've been here during the budget, I go on, so I'm part of the Mass Municipal
Right.
Personnel Association, and we have a database of benchmark surveys. I go on and pick communities under 10,000 residents, run the salaries and compare ours to theirs. We are at the midpoint or slightly higher for almost all positions.
Okay.
We're not at the low end and we're not at the high end.
Right. Good.
And that is, even for our union employees, we
Okay.
fit well within that range. I will say, and it's come up a few times even this last week, it came up at the meeting on Monday, the why the 2% across the board. And I will just say to that, in my opinion, with the current structure that we have here, that is really the only fair thing to do. Because without either personnel board overseeing all employees or a town administrator that has authority over all employees, you're taking recommendations from boards and committees that may or may not like the people that work under them. So someone may say, I think Jim's fantastic, he deserves a 10% raise.
Right.
But Teresa, I don't think she should get anything. And it's all based on, and it can all be based on
Yeah,
personality.
right.
You're not being fairly evaluated.
Right.
And to me, that's not fair to the employees, having it be based on what, it's not a fair comparison. You're not looking at goals and accomplishments.
Right.
You're just looking at how they think of you and how you interact with your
Right.
superior.
Well, municipal pay is not usually merit-based anyway, is it? Either you're either in a step category, or you're in where most of our employees are in, they have a salary and we decide whether they're gonna get an increase or not.
Yes and no. Over the last few years, the trend has been more merit-based because a lot of communities are putting in goals and actually making you work towards getting an
But
increase,
we
and it's
have
not
not
as,
been merit-based.
we have not here.
We've painted, but we've given everyone the same.
because you can't give merit-based if you don't have the same person scoring everybody. You can't have merit-based being scored by different people, cause it's all gonna
Right.
be subjective.
Right, we don't
Right.
have a personnel department to,
You don't
to-
have a manager.
yeah, like, we had a
Yeah.
personnel committee that laid out a really nice idea of evaluation system, but unfortunately, we don't have staffing here to actually perform all these evaluations consistently. It's
Correct.
tremendous amount of work.
Correct. So that's really why it's unfortunate for some people that it's the same increase across the board, because there are some people that are harder workers or do more or but until you can put together a formula that you're fairly evaluating everybody, it's not fair. So the fairest thing to do is
And even then, it's gonna be
Right.
1.5
okay.
versus 3.0.
Exactly.
It's gonna be a lot of expense for a very
Small variance.
small tweak. And
Right.
then you-
right, because in that case you usually say, well, we have, 12% overall, spread it out amongst these people, and then you look at your goals and you say, well, you're at a 1 and you might be at a 3, but right, you're not gonna exceed
Yeah.
the overall percentage.
Employees don't get performance appraisals in this town.
Correct.
Yeah, so if you don't have a performance appraisal, so they
Right.
don't have a direct supervisor. The method we're using is a small town method.
Correct,
And
because that's what
it
we
is
have.
work.
How do we line up like with other towns around us with what ones that are doing across the board raises? Are we in line or below?
Yep, so, I did check that out as well this year, and, I will say 2% was fairly standard. There were some 3s, there were some 1s.
Okay.
But the average was fairly close to 2%.
I mean, there might be a year we can't give 2%, maybe 1%, or maybe not anything,
Right.
I mean, it depends on the year, I mean, if the
Especially
cherry
for
sheet
raising
gets,
baselines.
the state is struggling this year, it's almost what, $1 billion short.
Yep.
So,
Right. Okay,
alright,
so
but,
we're good on this?
it was a fair question
Fair
that,
question,
that the
we'll-
person asked.
so we have a better
but
answer now.
I think,
Yeah.
I guess we weren't prepared, cause it was like every department was being,
Right, well now, we will be prepared then,
Yeah.
this is the point, we'll make
Well,
sure we know more about across the board raises around us and do it that way. And then answer the question candidly, that to really do a salary survey would require a consultant and a capital request to pay for the study. And is it worth it to do all the positions at one time, or is it better as we move forward and we change jobs and maybe doing it position by position?
Right, and there are consultants that are, there's actually several now that are retired, longtime town managers that now they do this for a living, and, I wouldn't say you're breaking the bank, but there is a expense associated, and there is time. I mean, it would take, they actually come in and sit with every employee, go through a job description. If you don't have one, they write one, based on what the conversation is, and they actually will put together a package of, these positions should be in this range, and so instead of, I said at the meeting the other night, it's very hard for us when we're hiring somebody, like you said, right now it's an arbitrary salary. It's what was the person getting paid, what do we have in the budget, what do we pick?
Right.
Versus, here's 7 classifications and everyone's within one of those ranges, and then it gives you some latitude, but you know what your range is for each position. We
Right.
don't have any of
We
that.
don't have that.
Everything is completely arbitrary for salaries. It just is.
We just use our own precedent.
We do.
We're a small town that uses,
I
the best information we have to fairly pay these people, and I think
I love that.
so
Sam.
far they've been fairly paid.
Correct, I agree, but I think it's hard trying to hire somebody when they say, you know, what is your policy, or what does it look like for the future for me, and you're like,
Well, if you're hiring someone from private industry, this is a whole different thing, you know.
Right,
The
right.
risk also is that if we do hire a consultant, the ultimate final recommendation will be something that we can't and would not wish to implement.
We
can't-
may not want to
we can't-
implement.
if we can't afford to
Yeah.
implement
For
it.
and that has
example-
happened.
For example, well, I recommend you folks go into merit-based system. Well, we don't have direct supervisors, we don't have town managers, how do we do that?
Well, it
And
opens
then,
up
like Ruth
legal.
said, we're gonna end up squabbling over 1.5 to 3%.
It opens up legal issues,
Hmm?
so
It does open up
Yeah,
legal.
so-
Big time.
I think until this town gets to a point where it's grown, and it will someday, then that will be something that may need to be addressed, but right now, I say it, if it ain't broke, don't go fixing it.
Totally agree. Well,
Okay.
Agree.
All right, so
But
good
like-
on that. So now we're up to financial goals and policies, and we have a stack.
let's approve them
What's the
all next.
financial-
Well, the thing I would look for is, rather than reading everything, all the way through, I
For
mean,
the
if-
town reserves.
Policy.
lining them up to see, like, this one, on page 5 of Ira, they have free cash, and then on page 2 of Weymouth,
Oh,
they
this
have
is-
free
this one,
cash, and they're basically
I'm gonna-
both saying the same things. And I'm guessing if I keep reading, they're all gonna say the same thing.
They're all gonna say fairly standard
so,
things.
right, they're gonna say, this is from the one on Town of Air, if I'm saying it
It's like
properly.
3 legal
He
records.
says free, well, it's actually a good idea to have this in our policy. It's a revenue source that results from the calculation as of July 1st of the community's remaining unrestricted funds from operations of the previous fiscal year based on the balance sheet as of June 30th. It typically includes actual receipts in excess, and it goes on to describe where the free money comes from. And then it goes on to say free cash plays a role in sustaining a strong credit rating, and the DOR encourages the adoption of policies on its use as a non-reoccurring revenue source. The prudent use of free cash would be to fund one-time expenditures or to replenish other reserves, not for recurring operating budgets. It tells about when it's not available for use. And then it states again, free cash is a necessary component of sound fiscal management and an indicator of fiscal health. So, in my mind, what this gets to is to point out to the town meeting that free cash, again, should only be used for a capital, one-time purchase, or to replenish a reserve, which is what we've been doing, so we're in line with that. But also to keep in mind that we want to have free cash happen every year. So we don't wanna get in a situation where we're chasing so many deficits that when they close out, we don't have it. We want to make sure we're closing with a healthy amount of free cash. And then it got into,
Isn't that legally required?
and that's not legally, we've been in the red. We've gone in the red, believe me. I've watched this town.
You can write bonds and things, you know.
So then they had there's a thing on the stabilization account, I'm looking for it, where it said, oh, here it is, on page 6, and I'm guessing the other ones will have the same one, I'm gonna see if they have the same percent. It says 7% of the operating revenue of a given fiscal year. Does that sound in line with other ones, Denise, or the others?
Well, it depends if you're just looking at stabilization or reserves as a whole.
Reserves are above it.
Right, but I think, you know, some communities benchmark 10% of reserves,
Okay,
of
overall.
stabilization, free cash, things like that.
Right, this one broke it out and just said 7% for the stabilization, oh, and then is 10% of the calculated fund balance, okay.
Yep.
And it gives a little, amount of money, like, so the people would be able to see at a town meeting how much money we're expecting to set aside every year into stabilization, rather than us just saying we're putting aside 75,000, we'd actually have a targeted amount of money that we're trying to put aside.
Why wouldn't it be a percent of revenues or something like that?
And I guess I don't follow that last
Well,
part.
the fund, it says it's 22 million, the calculated minimum funding balance is 1.54 million. I'm just saying they have a little discussion of where the numbers come from, which is a little more than we had at town meeting. All we did was say we're trying to build towards 10%, but we didn't explain, 10% of what. Actually show it
Yep.
here. They showed the calculation, which
Yep.
I think is good, and then they addressed that OPEB thing. They're far more aggressive than we are, and I think we should look through these and see what everyone else is doing, but they're putting aside, they have a liability of 11 million, and
So you wanna use them as an example?
yeah, well, no, I'm gonna look in the other ones too. I just
Some of
happened
them
to, this
were
afternoon I went
about
through
the
this one.
liability. The
So,
overhead, yeah, out of
they're
control.
gonna commit a minimum funding every year of 150,959 every year to this. Now, what did we?
How much was that? 150?
Yeah, and
With
we're,
an $11 million?
I know,
So we're at 85,000
I
with
know.
like a $2 million
I know.
liability.
So in other words, we have the audit report, so we have the number, just like they do. We can replace this number with our number,
Yep.
and this funding with our funding, and
Yeah.
and I'm sure these other ones, like I said, I'm imagining, my thought was to just take some of the basic, not the whole document, just some of the big ones, like that, the capital. Capital, they actually have an amount of money that they're setting aside every year for the capital budget, which is similar to
Yes.
what Denise has been trying to explain to us.
And I actually met with Jeff Pappas the other night and we chatted for a little bit and, it's kind of the same thing. They're kind of at a loss of what to do and, are they making recommendations? And I've explained to him that being in the situation that we've been in, our capital is funded by free cash, and until you know what it is, and right now, our priorities have been building our reserves, then we see what's left, and that's what we fund with capital.
Yeah, but that wasn't, cause I sit on the capital committee as well, and I was new, I don't know anything, it's like here last year, I didn't know what. But I will say this, that they put in an effort, they didn't know about that rule.
Right.
Okay, I mean, to me, when I saw the sheet at the last moment at this room, it was decided that these things weren't gonna happen,
Right.
The highway department says, yeah, I guess we can wait another year, but so what are the rules? Are they gonna, does Jeff understand what the rules are?
But there aren't, that's what I said to him was the issue, there are no set rules on how we either, because the current board doesn't believe in borrowing, they don't believe in having a, borrowing for capital, or putting a certain
Well,
amount.
I don't know, you mean the current board including me?
The selectmen.
Oh, the selectmen? Well, they need to be educated. I
Well,
mean,
and that's why I said, between this group here and capital, I think, maybe, Kathy, we've talked about
Yes.
having a joint meeting of the
Yes.
3 groups to talk about this. And how, in other communities,
They have the
you have debt service, and as you're retiring debt, you build capacity and you borrow in their place, so you have a steady debt, but you can then invest in your infrastructure. That hasn't been the case yet, it's always been paid for out of free cash or other methods,
Right.
but then it's only whatever's available is what we have to spend.
Right, and what
Doesn't
people don't
really
understand
make
is
a
as a result of that, there was a year that we set aside a significant sum of money for a new fire truck. And somehow that got lost in translation and we were documented as in the red because the money, got. And so what I'm thinking is like taking this section or and looking at the other ones too, of course, but if you look at what we have set aside so far, is there a percentage of that we could put towards a debt payment? That's what I'm asking. You know what I mean? Like if we're gonna have a meaningful meeting with people, we have to have something to talk about. To just talk about the lack of money is not going to be a productive meeting.
Right, so you cannot use free cash to fund a debt payment because,
I'm talking about the stabilization capital fund.
right, so yes. So right now, I
Yes.
think we're at 150,000 for the capital stabilization. I would say ideally you wanna add a little more money into that before you start taking it out for debt payments, but absolutely, that is what that could be used for. Every year at town meeting, you'd have to authorize, spending X amount of dollars to pay the debt service on this many capital items.
How much, what I'm thinking is that if we were to have a preliminary meeting and discuss something, what we would discuss is, because you don't know the free cash, we don't know that. So what percentage of that 150,000 could be set aside for a debt payment if the Board of Selectmen were willing, and what could that fund? That would be the question. You know what I mean? Where would you be comfortable as,
Well, but I think the question is, so that whole 150 is for capital and nothing more.
I know,
So it's just a matter of how comfortable you all are, but how quickly you wanna drain that by spending debt service on it. Because if we have a year that we don't have healthy free cash and we don't have money to replenish that, and you are spending $50,000 a year, you know, then you get 3 years, and then what? What if we don't have money to keep building that?
well, I'm looking at, if we go forward with our recommendations here on the budgets that went over, that we are working towards creating a situation where there are fewer deficits in the spring so that we should be generating free cash. That's what we're working towards, to generating a healthy sum of free cash so that if you're spending, I mean, I guess, I don't know, you know, take for example, if you wanted the highway truck, what would be the debt payment on that? Is that a 10-year?
Yeah,
Or
they
a
can,
5
they
year?
can be 5 years, usually trucks and things like that, depending on the size. For instance, a police cruiser, it's a 5 years. Larger vehicles may have a longer shelf life, so you could probably go 10 years.
Is it financially sound to go 10 years on a truck?
Well, with the fleet we have, they're all over 10 years old, so yes, you certainly could get a 10-year life out of a truck.
Okay,
But again, it really depends on
Wow.
philosophy. Do you wanna pay it off quicker and spend less interest? Or do you wanna spread it out over more years so you can add more debt with that? It really is all philosophical in how you want to, you know, if you spread it out, you can add more debt and buy more things, cause you're paying less each year for more years.
right,
Or you pay it off sooner and pay less interest and get it off the books and build capacity to borrow. So it's really how you wanna handle that.
I have a
Well,
recommendation
I-
when you guys are ready.
I would think that we
I
would wanna
see.
look at the existing capital outlook for 5 years and add your thing in there, okay? And then we're gonna have to
I
come up with the administration part of the computer upgrade
Oh,
and where that fits. And then we have a discussion about cost of each item, okay? And what would it impact on the stabilization fund? What would
Yeah.
be an approximate
Yeah.
dollar, I mean, you know? So, well, because we may have to incur debt that we don't want, okay?
do we want to, like, we're setting aside money in the operating budget to increase these, do we want to set some small amount of the operating budget aside towards possible
I
debt?
know there's a lot there.
Or,
You set you put a budget for stabilization and capital and you build that as part of your general fund budget. So you're not relying on free cash.
okay,
You make it a point, that's what the selectmen wanted to do with the OPEB. They wanted it in the budget, so they have to fund it every year. Last year it got to the point that it was taken out and then it was funded through an article and then we put it back, but you could do that too. You could make a line item for capital stabilization and commit to X amount of dollars a year, so regardless, so that if you have free cash, you get extra or you put it more into stabilization.
right,
But you could commit through the budget, stabilization, capital stabilization, OPEB.
Could we have a line for each year of capital request, what it would mean, roughly in dollars against the stabilization fund?
Yeah.
That's what we need,
So
So you want the capital plan,
and then,
if I
let's,
estimated a debt service on each year,
Yeah,
what
because-
it would cost.
right, and admit that'll be fluid, but
Right.
at least everyone will see what it is. So, I mean, these people get together like 4 or 5 times, and all of a sudden, it's like we don't, you know, some of the, other than the police tasers and stuff, every large item got wiped out.
right,
Well, you're gonna be kicking the can down the road here. So,
right, but you can't spend money you don't have.
you can borrow, okay?
You
Well-
can borrow, but you have to borrow with a plan. There has, and that's why I like these.
I'm asking, that's what I'm
So if
asking.
we do what Denise is saying, let's say we put a line in the operating budget, that's what, similar to what this town did, that line is some percentage of the operating budget, I don't know how much, it's probably fairly minuscule, 75,000. But by committing that, then we can turn around and evaluate the request against the
Correct.
ability to borrow.
Right, so
And
you either
that's-
do a debt payment for 75,000 and that's what is very standard, is you have 75,000 and then you back into it with what you can borrow to make that your debt service payment. And then as the years go on and you're rolling off debt because you're retiring, 5 years, a big chunk of that comes off,
Well,
then
that's-
you add capacity, okay, so there's 50,000 you can attribute to new debt.
Right,
And so, historically, had we been doing that, every year stuff would roll off and you add stuff in the
Okay.
capacity.
We used to do
And then
that.
they
have-
We used to do that, and then they decided at one point to just
Right.
pay it all off.
Well, it might be a little
Well-
less expensive, but it's bad for planning.
Can we get either,
Sorry.
you gotta plan even if you're gonna get in trouble with the plan, you know?
Well, that's it.
No.
I think we need to have a plan so that the capital committee feels that there's a vehicle for capital. It's not just a cloud in the sky that they don't know.
Right, they don't see the number, they don't,
Right.
but what I do know is they try to keep the amount as small as possible, and they'll move some things around, but, you know, it gets down to how much can you really move, because, you know, when you're interviewing the people, they say, we need it, or if it's a fire truck, the one we have, they have to be certified, they risk not, like engine two.
Yep.
This is the second hit on now, so,
So I have a recommendation.
anyway.
Go ahead.
If we took 2 or 3 years to write a policy book called the Finance Committee Policy Book, and this is from my experience being 10 years on the school committee, being in the policy subcommittee, we took a few years to get things done. So if we took a long-term view, it's conceivable that there would be 10 or more chapters inside this book. But I say that this year we write a 5-chapter book, and here are the chapters. We have a chapter on free cash. We have one on stabilization. We have one on other, OPEB.
The one that can't pronounce.
The other one.
It's been a long day at work. We have one on debt management, and we have one on capital planning. And then there's 5 of us at this table. Maybe you help write, focus on, go through all of these and
Yeah.
work with Denise and write that chapter on capital planning. I'll take OPEB. Kathy can take stabilization or free cash.
I love them both.
Okay, we'll just,
You
take
know
them
me.
both, take them both, and let's
Thank you.
write, let's be real experts at
Right.
5 chapters this year. Then, remember, policy is not a law, it's a guiding principle.
Yeah.
So then we go to the Board of Selectmen and say, we've written 5 policies in a multi-year project of developing finance committee policies. And these are the 5 that we are very dedicated to this year.
I'm gonna write this in like 2 days, you know that.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna take each
I'm
one of
just
these,
gonna
and
take
I'm
it.
just gonna cut the sections out and
Well,
put
it
them
doesn't
down
ma-
in front of me, and then I'm
But
gonna
it,
just
it doesn't
write.
matter, if we
Well,
do this,
'cause
if
why
we do,
reinvent the wheel?
but
This
if we
has
do,
been done.
but it doesn't matter, if we do this in an afternoon, we wanna get,
Yes,
we wanna get the Board of Selectmen and the town and people in
Yeah.
other departments acclimated to the concept of policy guidance,
yes.
cause it's a new thing. So if it takes us an hour to do this work, it doesn't matter, we hold ourselves at 5 chapters this year. Next year, we'll write another 2 or 3 chapters. There's other areas
I
like
would keep-
investment planning and,
Well, I'd
know.
keep it simple, Joe, I think,
Yeah.
cause to keep it so that people can come on the finance committee, on the
Yeah.
board,
follow.
and see something that's understandable, and that you go, oh, okay, I understand this.
And those chapters are 1-pagers.
This is easy, yeah, this is not
Yeah.
hard.
But those are the
And
5.
Denise, thank you, cause this is like, you shouldn't have to, I don't want Denise to have to write this, by the way, we've got to
I understand.
draft it at least and give it to her, so it's.
So those are the 5.
And you can rewrite it. But I mean, at least let us take a stab and help you out on this.
Are they available in Word so that we can,
Some of these are,
well, if
I
So-
don't, I can
You can
tell
still
you.
and I
come
will
back.
just say, so just one thing to note, if you ever wanna look, so as part of the Department of Revenue's Division of Local Services and their Community Compact Initiative over the last 2 years under Governor Baker, they are committed to helping municipalities on a myriad of topics. If you go to the DLS website, there is a Community Compact box. If you click on it, all of these are on there and 25 other communities' financial policies.
right.
It's too many.
But then they have other categories, they have other financial things, they have flow charts, they have organizational
Their
charts.
organization.
You can look at all different types of things that have already been done and certified by the DOR, so some of them may be in Word format. If there's one that you particularly like, I can reach out and ask them,
Well,
ask the
you
community
can still
for it.
cut, you can still highlight,
Okay,
cut and paste,
so,
put it on a Word
Joe,
document.
can I back you up to, are you making a motion here? Are we gonna divvy this up and, but let's get it rolling.
We can do a motion, or we can just do, agree by consent.
Okay, by consent, what are we consenting to?
Consenting that we focus on 5 policy areas and
Okay.
we divvy up the air who wants to do which one.
Okay.
I'll take OPEC, how's that?
The OPEB thing, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Would you like to take capital planning, cause you're on it,
Sure.
okay? Anybody else wanna take anything else?
What else?
I'll take free cash with the next one.
Okay,
Free
I'll do
cash?
that with you. I
Okay.
could stabilization, free cash, and reserves.
Maybe the 2 of you can work on
Yeah.
stabilization, free cash, and then debt management.
Is there a debt management?
What time tonight do you want it then?
Ruth, you wanna take a stab at that? And then debt management for Ruth, and that's it.
Wait,
Be
so-
done by 10:30.
So the best thing to do is to go through all of these
Ask.
and
I'm gonna
kinda
call-
gravitate
I'm
to
gonna
the
get-
ones you like.
Did you guys take something together or
I
separately?
can,
I'm just-
whatever.
I could do,
You said,
we could do
you
with
said
each other.
free cash,
Free cash, and I
and
got
stabilization.
stabilization. Yeah, I'll take stabilization.
I have OPEG.
Yeah, both Kathy
You're
said.
gonna
you
write
said-
about it,
Well,
no
no,
one's
I'm letting
told.
you have
OPEC.
free cash. I'm
What?
going
To
to
read
You want
free
free
cash?
cash?
Free cash.
No, you can have free
All
cash.
right,
I'll
all
take
right.
stabilization.
Other
Okay, then you have-
post-employment benefits liability, I can say the whole thing out, but I
I
can't say the
know,
acronym.
it's such a thing. It's so weird.
Well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look at all of these, instead
Yeah.
of trying to learn the entire, I'm just gonna look at all the
Right.
OPEBs of all these towns and then gravitate to the one I really like, cut and paste it, send it to Denise, what do you think, done.
All right.
Yeah, and if for some reason this one, like Chicopee has, I tried to get all of their,
Yeah.
I just took a portion, these policies are like 40, 50 pages. I tried to take, I cut out just sort of the financial reserve basics.
Oh,
They all should include an OPEB section,
what does OPEB stand for?
other
Other
post-employment
post-employment
benefits.
And probably the only one we're gonna get a little bit of resistance on realistically, but we're gonna stand on it, I believe we should, is the debt management. Because we have, for example, the Board of Selectmen, generally, when I was on the board, I understand, I don't, it's not a criticism, it's a very thoughtful idea that we don't wanna go into debt.
Right.
I understand that, but I believe that it's okay to go into a little bit of debt.
Well, but I think the same
Move
holds
things
true for
along.
capital, is because you
Yeah.
have a capital committee and you have the selectmen, and so I think, maybe once you draft these, that's when you have sort of your joint meeting
Right.
to
Yeah.
get everyone on the same page, especially for some of these items that debt management, people may think differently about. Capital, there may be
Right.
different opinions about.
Right, well, one of the things that I was thinking about, that's why I asked about the truck, is that because of the predicament that we're in, having exhausted reserves in the past to just buy equipment, and now
You mean fire?
we're just continually trying to wait for the pool to refill again,
Right.
we need to create an ongoing thing that, initially the first debt might possibly be best to put at 5 years, so that after you're a few years into it, we could look at a second piece of debt. Because a 10-year, I'm worried that our town won't have patience.
Well,
Well,
the
you bring up a
departments
good
won't
point.
have
If something,
patience.
you bring up a good point, if something has a 10-year shelf life, we should be planning 5 years
Right.
out, not
Well, I'm
not in the
also-
9th year.
But really, the ideal way to handle capital is if you have 6 capital items and you say, these are all what we wanna fund. Some are 20 years, some are 10 years, some are 5 years, all within that one issue. Because you stagger them within, because, that's how you spread out your liability. You spread it out so that you don't wanna pay it off in 5 years if it's a 20-year useful life, cause then
I
you're
see.
paying it too soon.
Too soon,
So
yeah.
then, but you wanna have staggered, unless really everything only meets the qualification for 5 years. But then you're gonna have a big chunk come off in 5 years, and then you're gonna add a big chunk on that may go 10 years, may go 5 years. So if you always have staggered debt within each issue, it adds more steady capacity throughout, instead of a big piece falling off and a big piece coming on. Every
Right.
few years, you'd be able to add another piece because you're spreading it out.
Okay, so that,
Accountant question,
right,
depreciation schedules are not tied into payment schedules.
Correct.
so the point would be that the departments would understand that this is the beginning of a process, that they may not be able to do everything the first year, but that they're not gonna be pushed off forever, but that if this is handled in a cooperative manner between the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Board, and the Capital, we'll get to a point where the needs are being met. Everybody may not get everything they want every year, I think that's always gonna be the case. That's one thing and I think that was the, my only criticism of using free cash to just buy the equipment is that it created a situation where everybody was lining up every year.
People were
With
a little
everything.
more frantic
Right,
because
well,
we
yeah.
just didn't
Well,
know
Right.
this year or maybe
Correct,
not.
right, right, so
However
there's.
many. This
a
way,
little-
if there's a plan, there's a plan.
Right, so you would know, you would be, not guaranteed, of course, cause any plan is, can be
Right.
fluid, but at least you'd be an understanding in the capital area when you guys are meeting with departments, they would know.
We need to
How-
know money.
Right, you need to know
I
money, you
haven't-
need to be
I mean,
able to put a cap
it would
on it.
be
Yeah,
not actuals, but it has to be something that you have an idea of what you got here.
yeah,
Because at the end of the day, it's either there. The policy has to be, if the existing board doesn't like that, then that's a big problem. Because you can't continue not to like that.
well, the way I look at it too is the residents that are here today aren't necessarily going to be here in 5 years or 10
Exactly.
years, and if it's a piece of equipment that's going to be around for quite a while, why shouldn't all residents bear some part of that cost? I mean, there's different ways to look at it.
Yeah.
And I did recommend to Jeff when I met with him that I think it's important for, if the capital is gonna recommend equipment, so a truck be replaced, I said, I really think it's helpful for schedule one night, have the highway bring their truck here, let the selectmen know, the finance board know, so you can all actually look at the piece of
Oh, I
equipment.
wanna
Right.
see it now.
Because the
Right.
question came up last year for the board member said to, did you actually look at it? And Jeff said, I went down to the highway, I looked at some of these things. But I think if you bring them here, put a note out to everybody so that if you're available, you can physically see it, the selectmen can see it, so that the questions aren't there of, well, what kind of condition is it?
Well, we
Because
got
you've all
the-
had an opportunity, whether you had the
To
availability.
be fair, the police department did bring a taser, cause they had them show it to
Right,
me.
right.
I was gonna say, I was worried about where he was going with that
I said,
statement.
I want us, it was a note, I said, show me how
Scary
it
there,
works.
Jim.
You gotta do that. 'Cause
You wanted to use it on a few people, didn't you?
Yeah.
But I think, for those big pieces of equipment, I think it's important.
Right.
Yeah,
Even
think
for
so,
this
too.
group, it's like to actually see it.
Well, the
Visual.
highway
A lot of people are
department has
visual.
one truck that's just a rust bucket.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone in town knows what that
Yeah.
one is. You don't need, just send me a picture of that one.
Right.
Okay?
I think a paint job will take care of that.
we'll touch that.
Yeah,
Okay,
don't get me
so
going on
we're
a
good
paint
on this
job.
agenda item then, we have a consensus?
Is that right? I mean, we can
Yeah.
operate by consensus.
Okay,
I suppose.
so,
All right. We have our assignments.
we do, and we need to just finish out a few more items. We have this letter that everybody saw from the last meeting, you guys can share it, you should have seen it, Jim. Is this okay with everybody,
Oh, yeah. Yep.
What is this?
or? Denise is
Oh,
looking.
dear honorable, is that me?
You didn't see this.
Oh,
Oh,
oh, you're not supposed to see this.
oh.
Secret.
Yeah.
It's a secret. It's a coup.
So don't be looking now, okay?
You're hiding your paper, I can't look.
Alright, okay.
Perfectly acceptable from the,
Yes,
when
I
I
agree.
first saw
Well,
it.
if you wanna make a motion to vote it, you can actually sign it tonight.
All right, I'd like to make a motion that we.
Denise, close your eyes.
Yes.
It's not a new car.
It's not
So
a
do you want
highway
me to
truck
just
either.
sign, or Joe
We
need
need to
sign
make
it?
a motion and a
It's a
second and
new, it's
vote.
a new server.
Surprise.
I need a motion and a second.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the letter. It was drafted by the chair,
Oh, Chief, you can put a date on it.
dated,
It's not dated.
we'll date it today,
We'll just
dated
handwrite
October.
August 22nd,
Third.
23rd,
Yeah,
2017.
I think I actually put as voted date and time at the bottom so we can fill it in.
Say it again?
I think I put date and time we voted, so I realized
Yeah,
I didn't have a
thought,
date on it,
Yeah.
so I was trying to cover the bases, so we'll just fill that in. Okay, we have a second on that?
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, unanimous, okay. Thanks. Not dated, okay, so I'll date it. Here you go. You got it, huh? It's like a birthday card thing. It's like a joint birthday card, but not really.
Birthday card.
We're gonna just give it to you anyway, so. We give it to the Board of Selectmen. It's not gonna be a surprise. Okay, so, we do need to vote, organization of our group. Do you wanna reorganize for the new fiscal year? Is everybody signed it? You can go to Denise then. It's all signed?
Yep.
We'll just make a copy for our records and you can have it. So, we need to decide, do we wanna reorganize?
Well, we need to vote members, but we're perfectly, I mean.
Yeah, we do need to vote
We'll vote
everyone.
members, I'll make a motion to retain Kathy as our chair.
I second.
Any discussion?
Just get it out of your
I
system
have to
now.
do that because you
I
can't.
know.
Any discussion?
I can't discuss, don't look at me.
I'd like
All
to,
in favor?
favor,
Aye.
I'd like to make a motion to appoint, Jim as a vice chair.
I second.
Any discussion? Cause you can't say it.
Any discussion?
Yes, ma'am.
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
And I'd like to
You
make a
can't do
motion,
You can actually.
You can vote for yourself.
I'd like to make a motion for Ruth to, as secretary until she reaches retirement.
Not fair.
She has an open-ended assignment, so no matter who's on the board.
Like the Pope, you can only go out with your feet first.
Okay.
I second.
Any
Teresa's a
discussion?
good seconder.
I know,
too.
she is.
I'm on it.
Okay, all in favor?
All right,
Aye.
and that's it. Those are the three positions that need to be on.
Did you vote on all three of those, Kathy, or did you not vote the first?
I didn't vote.
You didn't vote, and you
Yeah.
didn't vote the second?
I usually don't vote unless I need to.
Oh, you don't vote usually?
Yeah, they just,
Unless we need you for,
You just say unanimous.
yeah, we just say
there was
unanimous.
nobody that
No
abstained
objection.
from
Right,
any
yeah,
of
nobody
those.
There was no
abstained. It was
Okay.
all.
So,
Yeah.
now should we
No,
go to our
everybody-
regular,
everybody.
third Wednesday thing now for the rolling forwards?
Works
or-
for me.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
You know
so,
how I like things. the way
well, I
it
know,
is.
it makes it easier to remember.
Wednesday at 6.
So
Third
what's the
Wednesday until we get into,
third Wednesday?
you know, it
That's
starts
it.
to.
So starting September 20th?
Yeah.
Sure.
let's do that.
September 20th.
And I'm still trying to pick up people as we can, we could fill two more members,
Chairman,
yes.
I know we don't have the school committee budget. I wanna be a little more proactive in bringing them in because last year we didn't have,
We didn't meet with any of them, we just.
I
ran
mean,
out
for
of time.
example, I didn't know they were adding head count. I mean, you know, they hired this, it was okay, but, you know, things like, you know, a new assistant superintendent.
Oh, they did create new positions,
Yes.
okay. They don't have a hearing, a public hearing until, I think, March, it's
Yes.
late.
So even though it's not finalized and they're still in some ballpark, I think it would be good to
You
have
could
them
even,
meet us.
you could meet with them even early just to see how
Right,
they think, how the year's going, what they anticipate, so that you're not only meeting with
Yeah,
them in March.
okay, right, okay, yeah.
well, they know the enrollment counts in October, right?
Right, October 1st.
Yeah, so we can meet with them in November if you wanted.
I would-
I think November is a.
Maybe November, but
Yeah,
not sooner.
absolutely. You can
Yeah,
start-
cause actually,
you can start
the
things up in
building
November.
project is really ramping up now with
Mm-hmm.
them. So they will be able to give you an update on that as well.
Okay,
Well, that
so
sounds out of it.
I think that completes.
So what would you do, just have one representative member
But,
join us?
No,
Any-
I'm assuming it would be
It
the
would be
superintendent and
the
business manager.
Yeah.
superintendent and the business
Yes, who
manager.
would come.
I would recommend, this is gonna be a big project, I would recommend, a meeting, a joint meeting with, the superintendent, possibly the school committee, and, also finance directors and the finance committees of all three towns. Talk about the building.
that's tough to get that all together, but
It's possible.
aren't they making, don't they have a regional task group on
They
it?
do. or we attend those meetings. Another thing about the budget, of the best way to do the budget, and not to take away anything from our school committee members, but the best way to take care of the budget is one of us or two of us show up at those budget meetings. But I think that they could have one as early as November, an initial one. I thought they did things just before the New Year. We didn't have to wait all the way till March. I think there was initial work that was done in
I was on the
December.
school committee for a couple of years, and my recollection is we were changing things
Yeah.
right on through up until the public hearing, and even after that public hearing,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Right, that's why the budget they give me is really useless, cause
It's
they
very
change it over
useless.
and over until they
Yeah.
have that
Okay.
hearing.
We did, and we changed it after the hearing based on what people say.
I think
That's
hitting
why
the road is probably one of the best.
I
we
don't-
do.
Is
Just
that
like
hearing
September
set in
18th,
the
one of us
regional
was there.
agreement, I believe, right? Unfortunately, I think that hearing is set, the date is set in the regional agreement. I don't know why they do it then,
Yes, I think so.
it might be, okay.
Let me ask you a question. Didn't you have on the agenda also the assignment of who goes to what departments and
Yeah, I
committees?
did, I don't know what's not on this
Yeah.
one, but, before we adjourn, let's take care of that under the other business,
Mhm.
we already voted you to go to Capitol, no, wait.
Community
you're on-
No, it's
preservation.
community preservation.
No, so we haven't voted a Capital person yet.
What
But
do
you
you
were-
need? What are the requirements? Capital?
No,
Well, no capital.
Oh, you're
just
on-
community preservation has a finance board representative,
That
as
was-
an actual appointed member.
You were on that, Joe, as a
I was, yeah.
selectman, weren't you?
I was.
Okay.
Yeah, so you could have a, you could have a liaison that works between you and Capitol, but, I mean, Jim serves on both anyways.
That's
Okay,
good.
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
two separate
like I said,
appointments, okay, that's
yeah,
right. So
I
there's
was just-
nothing else that we have to have a representative on,
No,
yeah, that's good,
Just a CPA?
yes.
just to see.
Speaking of community preservation, how come there's still all those lily pads out in
Oh, don't go
They
there.
haven't started that project.
Johnson's Pond?
There's some, well,
They're
I
working
don't
on
wanna get
getting
into it. The
Consultants.
state isn't gonna pay for it isn't we're short money on the CPA.
I thought we already had the money, I know, I saw something on the town crier
We're
about it.
depending on the state fund for something,
I didn't realize that.
yeah, so I don't know if the water lilies are in play or not.
Well, they're
I don't know, that's a question to ask Mike, I don't know. I know there was something that came out, I don't know why.
I don't know, I haven't heard any of that, so I just know that, we did up the specs for them
Oh.
to solicit prices for engineering and, on the two Johnson's Pond and Johnson's watershed projects. So that's pretty much where that is, at
Sure,
least
absolutely.
that I know of.
Well, I mean, when we set these projects up, did we have an expected completion date of during the next fiscal year, was that,
No, they have a three-year
okay, so,
lifespan.
so that's maybe something to keep in mind, so when we get into the budget cycle, we can check on the progress and make sure that things aren't running behind where they need to be.
Yes, so I know Mike just followed up with a couple projects that are due to expire this coming May that haven't even started from, 2 years ago now. And he's followed up with those projects to say either you need to get them done or you're gonna have to request a extension at town meeting.
Okay.
So, of the ones that were voted this past year, I think the only one that's actually made progress is the cemetery software. I think it's the only one that's really gotten going from this past town meeting.
I won't ask.
I like to tell them to move the records down into the town hall, if that building goes.
Well, so, I believe I'm meeting with the cemetery commissioners next week,
I
next
think you
Thursday.
are too.
So we are moving some of their items forward, and obviously the records is one of them, some storage and things like that, so that is, it's just starting to get underway, that part of it.
That's good.
It is. It's gonna work. So I think, believe it or not, we've done it again.
Well, and anyone know of any potential? Have you?
Other people? Jim says I'm being stubborn.
No, look, I sent the memo to that individual.
You did?
Oh, you did?
and no, I did not get a response
Yeah,
back.
so I'm not
He never
positive.
Attended, so I'm assuming the response of nothing is,
Right, me too.
Yeah.
That's kinda how I feel. I don't wanna
So.
continue to.
so,
Yeah.
can you on that beautiful website that could you make bigger, you know, in color, you know, a beautiful ones, you
We
know.
want our,
A bigger and beautiful.
More pictures, I can do that.
Pictures of Maui.
So
talk about the
we're
It would be
trying
nice
to
to have
recruit
one more.
one more alternate and one more.
member.
2 more members.
I
We
want
need, we
2
really
more
could use
members.
2 more members to be full, we should have 2,
We need one
more
extra
and-
one,
right.
at least.
And the point is that even if you didn't make every single meeting,
That's okay.
we are able to work with that, with the size that we have now, this is very workable. So, you know, I think some people are afraid, cause, you know, if they commit and then they can't make every single meeting, is that gonna be a problem? You know, it's not a problem for this committee, cause once you start setting down policies and procedures, it's easy to step right in and just follow the steps. And, we do need to have a broad spectrum of taxpayers on here, I think sometimes people feel like they have to be like a financial wizard, it's not like that. I mean, you balance your home budget, you pay your taxes, you have a right to know what's going on in your town, it's one way to get familiar with the town.
Yep.
You learn a lot in a short period of time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I will say, we do have several boards that are not staffed appropriately right now, and, it's becoming an issue across the board, because, you know, we have like, the planning board actually just appointed their full 5th member, but the zoning board is still short, and that gets into issues with permitting, and
Wow.
the water and sewer commissioners, they're down to 2, I mean, so we do have an issue that we need volunteers, but,
I've changed the channel.
we don't have a charter. We'd have to create a charter to change
well,
it.
but we can, like we did with our committee, there can be changes made, you know, to boards and committees over time. I mean, that's not our charge, it's fine, I think we have to stay within finance, but I think within finance, I still feel that we need to, make a recommendation on the highway commissioner position being an
Yes.
elected position, cause it's a huge financial, responsibility for the town. And you know, you manage that snow and ice removal budget, which, you know, we wanna have we wanna be able to hire whoever is the best qualified for this position. You know, we've been lucky for years with Bob Erkelian, you could get lucky again with an elected position, but you could also,
The other way.
and again, when that position, years ago, when I was first on the finance committee, that position was much smaller, much lower salary, much lower responsibility, it's grown tremendously.
So, right now, we're on the agenda called other business, why don't we put that on the agenda next?
But
year?
that's what I think, yeah.
Yes, so
Let's-
if I may, I don't know if any of you caught the meeting Monday night,
No, it didn't.
so
Next
the
meeting.
water and sewer commissioners came before the selectmen to start this exact same dialogue, because they're in a situation that they cannot retain a full board. You know, Jimmy Sheehan, who's been a longtime member, is looking to eventually not be on that board, and he's concerned about the future of the department and where that's going.
Sure.
So he wanted to start a dialogue about a DPW, a consolidated
Yeah, that's good.
cemetery, water and sewer, highway.
Exactly.
So I did mention to him, that I know that this board has talked about some of those things, and maybe between the momentum here and the momentum there is a good time to get that dialogue going. The selectmen seem receptive, but, they wanted some more facts, they wanted them to do some research, and, I am gonna reach out to Merrimack Valley Planning to see, they do have services they can offer us. I plan to meet with the director there to find out what the end result would be. What can they present to us? Is it how efficient it could be? Because the benefits of consolidating would be obviously equipment. We don't need 2 dump trucks, one for water, one for highway. You need 1 because it's all under the same umbrella.
But-
If a water main breaks, you reallocate your staff to that. If there's a cemetery issue, you move your staff. So everybody's cross-trained. In the winter, they can all plow. So you have these efficiencies. You can still keep your enterprise funds and keep those monies separate, but it just adds layers of cross-training and efficiency that we don't currently have. So I don't know what Merrimack Valley Planning can produce. They can help us with this. So I don't know if it's what, you know, if they would come in here and make a recommendation. I don't know if they would just say, these are where we see efficiencies by doing this. Or if they say, you're too small, we don't see any benefit, you know, any one of those things.
Yeah.
But I'd like to know from them what their process will be before we allocate, it's not money, it's hours, we get a certain number of hours a year, every year to use of their services.
Oh, I see.
So before we dedicate hours, I wanna know what they're gonna produce and see if it's gonna be
So
beneficial to us.
we can consolidate cemetery, department, highway
Water.
and water into a Department of Public
Yes,
Works.
that'd be public works.
And that's something that we can sponsor if.
Well, here's my thought, is that,
Would be a sponsoring committee on warrant?
that's a longer term process than just taking a position and making it appointed. And, you know, I think, maybe we should invite Bob Killian in to get he could talk to you about the job and what it
Yeah,
entails
good.
right now.
Right.
But I mean, he's going to be nearing his retirement, and we have to be aware that, you know,
So he has 2 years, and he is a strong advocate for going appointed.
Can we
so this
go
would
in
be the year
phases,
to
like,
go to this
We have to
appointment,
do it.
right?
It's a-
Yes, that is a priority, making sure that when his 2 years are up,
it's elected.
it's appointed.
And that could be.
Whether you start
Pointed
working
out.
on
And then
the other
go
stuff
for
at the
the
same
DP.
time, but I don't think you can implement it all at
Right,
once.
No,
so
that's
I don't
what
want
I'm
us to become the DPW task group either,
Right.
because
DPW
we're the finance
or
board.
the
Yeah,
And
fine,
requires
I'm
town vote
solely
as well.
concerned
Town
about that
meeting
this
and a town
position
election
has
vote.
control
that's fine.
and that's where
over
it's
snow and
been.
ice
I do
removal, which is allowed to go over the budget, and so you wanna make sure that
Absolutely.
you have the right person, that you have the right management
Right.
of that
And it's an
unit.
appointed position,
Right,
with
and,
appointed
you know,
vested,
we've been, again, we've
appointed by the
been,
Board of
very
Selectmen.
we've been really lucky having Bobby
Yeah, of course.
Killian for a very long
How
time.
many years has he been doing this?
A
He
long,
told me today, it's either 22 or 23,
It's a
he
long
thought.
time. yes.
That's-
He's the
We were
highest
talking
guy.
about his forms, and he actually said a snow plowing form. He's like, it's the same one I used since I came here, like 23 years ago.
So he's like, you know, the father of the highway department.
Right.
Yes,
I mean,
he's the
he
one that
knows-
grew this department, and
Yeah.
through the road
No.
study and everything, he
So-
grew this department.
Good.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
should
But
we
I would
invite
think
him
you'd
in?
also get a much
Oh,
better
absolutely.
quality of
Okay,
candidate,
let's
do
because
see if
who
he
wants to
come.
put themselves out there for an elected position that they may not get, you know,
Again, After the 30
by,
years that you, right.
right,
You'd
I
be
mean,
surprised
right.
for the amount of, this is a pretty
Right, for the money
competitive
and the
salary.
responsibility.
Oh, yes, that you don't have to go for an interview or anything, you
I
just have to.
know, I'm saying that's kind of there's a risky
Right.
aspect for the,
Well,
It's
on
very
behalf
risky.
of the town
yeah, you
too.
could get a talker and not know anything about construction
But-
or highways.
But not just that, but the pool of candidates, I mean, how many candidates want to say, I mean, I personally would much rather have a job that somebody offers me that I take, that I'm not at risk of not getting elected again every
Well,
so
if
often.
you do a real good job,
versus the
you're always gonna get, and he's been elected and elected and elected. Even though last time his
It was
opposer came in pretty close.
So this
But you
is,
don't know,
this would
like,
be.
it could be me running,
Well,
and I
and
don't
that's
know
what-
anything.
Right, I mean, that's what he said, that's his fear, is he
Right.
has built the department and the, you know, it's a significant budget, there's significant infrastructure and resources and, you know, years ago, and I honestly don't know the person, so I mean, no disrespect, but someone who owned a pizza shop ran against him.
Yeah.
And he said, that's what you're facing, is it could be someone with no experience that says, I'll give that a try. And that's what you could, and they could win, and they could be put in that seat and know nothing,
Right.
and here you're giving them
But I don't
staff
wanna-
and
I also
contracts
look
and
at
equipment
just
and.
from financial, is that this particular budget, of all the budgets in the town, can overspend for
No
the
question
safety of the
asked, right.
town.
Well, they can do
They-
that because
yes.
the law allows.
Six
By
figures
law,
easily,
they're
like
allowed,
we.
Right, exactly.
Right, and that's something that, you know, you really have to have an
Control
individual that
over.
really
That won't
understands
change.
that.
And
That
he
won't
does, he doesn't call out contractors, he has the whole plan when it snows, who's called out when, who does what. You know, it takes time to sort of get that, and so I really think it's to the point that you want someone who's already trained and knowledgeable and has those skills and background and just has to learn how we do things here,
Right.
not how to operate and run that department, like that's really, you want someone that's qualified to step in and
Okay.
Yeah.
take over those types of roles. That's a big
So
one.
if we want to take that on as an agenda item, we would limit, I mean, I understand the DPW is a great discussion and certainly,
No, it should be focused on just
but
that.
I think we've got to.
I think we're gonna be
measured
making a big
steps.
strategic contribution towards the eventuality of a consolidation,
Yes, I would agree.
but that's not our work.
You're only a year away when No,
Right.
not
So
next-
he's up 2 years.
Yeah, well, it's coming quick.
So,
Right, and you
yeah.
have to have it for town meeting and
Right.
the election,
You
Right.
got
so.
2 town
Right, and you have to
meetings.
get it through yes, so it
You have
takes,
to- Yeah,
so this is the year, that's why.
this is the
that's
year
why
it
I
has to
found
be,
it.
yeah.
So, I mean, I
So
think,
how do we sponsor that?
well, I think we sit down with Bob and talk to him a little bit at a
Yeah.
meeting, and then, the article, you know,
We
would
would
be,
do the,
would be similar
the
to
committee that would
something-
sponsor an article to do it.
well,
You
yeah.
could, well, I will say, I actually think, I mean, they did last year, I think the selectmen will support it, cause they're in favor of it.
Oh, I'm sure they will.
I think the problem in the past, from what I've heard, is there's either has not been enough dialogue leading up to it, so people go
Right.
in there and, you know, I think to get Bob involved and to have him stand at the podium in a meeting and say, this is where you need to go, and
Yeah,
I'm not
right.
running again, and,
Yeah.
you know, I think people have been afraid that if you voted appointed, he'd be gone, and he was, you know, he's very popular, so
Right.
I'm
I
just-
think you need to
You
sell
know
it
what?
with the,
We did
Right.
this,
He's
this is it, I knew
retiring and-
when we changed the treasurer's position,
um,
we've done this.
Alright,
So that's what we need to look back at,
Mhm.
because, I think there was even language that the person would continue in the position
yes,
to
you
the
could
end.
put that in there,
Yes,
until the end of their term, or until
Yes.
they choose,
right,
yep.
yep, and, so we have done this before, and the treasurer position was for the same reason, that we needed to make sure that that was filled by a qualified person, and it was a
But
financial
I think
impact
it's
on the
good for
town.
this committee to sponsor it directly.
Yes, because it's a very big financial issue for the town,
Absolutely.
it's
And I
important.
think, you know, that'll be our second year. We were very well received in the first year as a new committee.
So are
now-
you gonna try for this coming town meeting?
Yes,
Oh, absolutely.
just this one simple,
Yeah,
yeah,
gotta
Yeah.
be done.
Yeah.
If others
That's good.
yeah.
watch what we're doing, that might encourage
Because that will
similar
be-
behavior like the water and sewer.
Mhm.
But we
Right,
don't have
cause
to-
then you know,
Then
so
you
that
don't
as
have to be
last
part
year,
of
we
it.
could start planning and interviewing and
and
getting
then
someone
people
ready.
won't be
Right,
thinking they
right.
can run for the
Right,
job.
right.
Yeah, it has to
Right.
happen the next
Okay.
town meeting, absolutely.
As you know,
That's great.
I was advocating for it
Yeah.
3 years ago, actually.
alright.
It's good, it's good. And there's
Alright.
gonna be I think that, you know, there'll be widespread support for it
Well, it needs to vote at town meeting and at the ballot,
at the ballot.
and then it goes to legislature, and then,
I don't think, just to make him appointed, it requires anything other than the town meeting vote and election vote.
okay, you think so?
Need legal
DPW, things like that,
I'm
you need
thinking of
special
the finance
legislation.
where we're creating a whole department,
Yeah,
that's
no,
what-
I think it only requires
Just
the
do a
two.
1-for-1,
Okay.
You don't
Okay,
need to invoke
good.
the home rule petition.
No, I don't
Great.
believe so, just to
Okay.
go elected to
Well, that would
appointed.
help
and then the
simplify.
DPW could be another phase.
Cause you would
of
add
how to
another
get
year
that
almost
going.
if you did that.
I know, that's why
Then
I'm
we'd
concerned.
really be up against,
Yeah,
but no, we can get it all done and have it approved May, whatever that date is next year, May 5th, 6th, 7th, whatever it is, done,
So,
done deal. Beautiful.
good,
Sounds good.
We don't need too many signs to be put on lawns to get it done.
No, that's for sure.
well, I think
Because
you're
I was
gonna
gonna
need to
get my
do
sign up there
PR.
right
Put
away.
those signs
We
away.
need to do some PR, because people need to understand we're not taking away their rights to choose people, but we're protecting their tax dollars.
Absolutely.
That's what they need to understand, and, that's always a tougher sell, because Bob's done such a good job all these years, people can say, well, what's wrong? Nothing right now, you know,
But,
But I will say,
you know,
I don't think a week goes by that someone doesn't come in here that has a complaint, highway related in general.
yeah.
You know, and the response is always, well, he's elected, you know, you can't go to the selectmen, you can't, you know, so, I mean, I think enough people will, you know, even with the Route 97 project,
Right.
I mean, you know, there have been people up in arms over it, and
there's nothing you can
he's
do.
like, you know, oh well. So, there's nothing you can do.
Right.
So if someone does have an issue, there is no recourse. It's, you wait 3 years and hope you remember it at the ballot to, you know, vote against them,
Right.
but, so I think accountability is important, especially in that type of role, with that type, like I said, the money, the equipment they have, the staff,
I just think the job has grown so much, it was
What-
like $40,000 job, and now it's what, 80, 90, it's 80.
So if there is a consolidation and water and sewer become appointed and so forth, that's all things we talked about 5-6 years ago when we were talking about
Yes.
a 5-member board.
and I think
You
you
can
talk
appoint, you can
about,
appoint more positions with a 5-member board.
correct, and I think, you know, as part of that, it's, at that point, you wouldn't need a water and sewer commission.
Right.
You don't even need them to be appointed, you just wouldn't need them. The
Right.
Board of Selectmen become the water and sewer commissioners to set the
Exactly.
rates and things
Yeah.
like that. You know, maybe you give more authority to the superintendent that the sewer commission, the water and sewer commissioners had, and then give you know, the higher authority to the selectmen.
Right.
Right.
But those are all things that then would be worked out, you know, and
Sure.
same thing with cemetery.
Mhm.
Do you still keep an appointed cemetery commission for deeds and things like that, or do you sort of do away with them again and add the authority here somewhere? You know, those are things that have to be discussed, but,
And that's gonna help.
it can certainly be done.
It'll help with the long-term trend of lack of volunteerism.
Exactly,
Because ultimately, the other answer is, you know, some form of town administrator. And, you know, and that might happen in the future. But I believe that these consolidations and these changes now is where we need to be in the history of the town. Let's get those done first.
Good,
Okay,
all right,
We're in good
I'll
shape.
make that motion.
making a motion to adjourn the meeting.
7:50.
So
7:50.
moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
There you go.
Would
Right
you
on
be able to
time
send me
again.
these, like,